So getting back to the story we were just talking about with this defendant, this man who was the student who was arrested, the U of M grad student, we had a lot of questions about the why here, and then also, the rights of this person and the rights he may have given up, perhaps when he pled guilty to this DUI charge. So we wanted to bring in Madeline Summerville, who is a political analyst and also an attorney who did some digging on this earlier this week. Madeline, thank you for being with us again.
Yes, ma'am. I'm very happy to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
You don't have to call me. I know you're from the South, and you don't have to call me now. You've been on the show enough now. Thank you for showing that respect.
Of course.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit because this was a question that we've had kind of all week as journalists and taking a look at covering the ICE detentions of some of these folks around the country, specifically students, is that there doesn't seem to be just like one thing that's happening. In this case, it's someone with a prior DUI from a year ago. In another case, it might be somebody posted something on social media that was some sort of rhetoric that was harmful. What is sort of happening, overview, and then I'll ask you kind of more specifically about this case in Minnesota.
Sure. So in terms of what's happening in general, just with students, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said that he has said that students who are protesting on campus is causing, quote, destabilization of the universities. And so for national security reasons, he is working with these various other organizations that sort of do some digging online to find international students who are doing more than protesting, actually. So like, as you said, there was, one gentleman who had a DUI that obviously isn't destabilizing these universities, but they're sort of traveling down a dangerous path here because the process that they're using to try to argue that these folks should be deprived of their status here as students is not entirely legal or acceptable because they're using national security reasons. Mm-hmm. And so like when you look at the woman from Turkey who wrote an op-ed in her school newspaper a year before about how the America shouldn't be funding Israel with the war on Gaza, it's very far removed from destabilization. So it looks like what's really happening here is that they're just sort of using it as an excuse, this national security threat or destabilization. They are going after protesters, that's true, but it's kind of gotten out of hand.
So you talked to me about due process when we spoke last, and is there kind of a sentiment that this is kind of trying to go around the due process piece of this?
Yes, and so I can kind of explain it on a larger scale. So I know we talked earlier in the week about the Alien Enemies Act. That is the reasoning that the Trump administration is using to try to argue that people who are accused of being, for example, in the Tren de Aragua gang or others who are supposed to have had gang activity should be deported without due process, right? And when it comes to national security reasons, the Trump administration has more authority than they would otherwise. However, the Supreme Court has just ruled that even if he invokes the Alien Enemies Act or it is a reason of national security, that still isn't enough of a reason to deprive people of their due process rights, which just means you get to stand in front of a judge and plead your case and say, hey, I didn't do this, or I have proof that I'm not the person that you think that I am. And really, I think we explained this earlier in the week too, the Alien Enemies Act, it's an interesting choice, and it's very revealing that the Trump administration chose to use the Alien Enemies Act, not because it's old, but because of the reason it was created. Mm-hmm. So it was created for times in which there was either one, war declared against a country, or two, another country had invaded ours, right? So there have been some arguments that, there's been an invasion at the southern border, but there's not, I think everyone would agree that there's not been an invasion that was sent by a specific country. And so the point is that if there's such an imminent threat of danger, right, because there's this war going on or because there's an invasion going on, that you can't afford to have a foreign national from this country in your country, then you can bypass protections like due process. Yeah. That's the whole point of picking that statute, is because it lets you take people out of the country without giving them their rights, and you do have rights even as an immigrant and a non-citizen here.
Wouldn't the Trump administration though say there is a war going on? This is why I was, he might say, this is why I was elected. America elected me to put America first. And if maybe these, and you tell me, but maybe these rules have sort of existed, but we've just never clamped down on it. We've actually just not been really strict about it. But if we have people here who are, anti-American, or who have a conviction for a DUI, and it's my understanding that I think when the student we were talking about here in Minnesota, when he did plead guilty, he did sign the document that said, I understand that my status here in the U.S. could be revoked. So. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like, well, are we just laying down the law now? What do you think about that?
Sure. And I appreciate being able to bring up some of the arguments that other people might say, because I think that's how we get somewhere. That's how we get to understanding what's going on and understanding each other. So in this particular case, right, there are some people who would argue that there is an invasion at the southern border. But again, that needs to be from the country itself that you're sending these specific immigrants back to. When it comes to war, Congress has to declare war. And so one thing that the Trump administration is arguing is exactly what you brought up, which is that he has a mandate. The people want him to do this, and I think that that's interesting, because it's sort of like the fourth estate. When you think about the checks and balances that exist, right? We have the legislative and the judicial, and then the fourth is like the media, which is the story that the people are getting, and the communication that the people have back to the powers that be, and I think that. That's why clarifying things like this is so important, because the law does make those distinctions. Like Congress has to declare war, and it's not because we want to be really careful about sending people. We want to be really careful or put immigrants' interests above Americans. It's simply because we care about due process. That's all. And the possibility that an American is being deprived of their right, or somebody who doesn't deserve to be taken out of the country is deprived of their right to stand in front of a judge and say, I didn't do this, is something that we don't believe in. And also, just to clarify, because I know a lot of people are confused about this, because I know I was before I did the research. Doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not. You have First Amendment protections. You are allowed to speak your mind and criticize the American government when you're here, and that doesn't make you a threat to national security. The problem is that the people who are in power are the ones that get to make those decisions, and then there needs to be a check on it, right? There needs to be a check on all those things. So I appreciate that we're examining all the different sides of it, because I think that's exactly what our responsibility is as Americans.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt. So, and just really quickly, just a quick follow-up on that. So, when those words or those sentiments lead to though action, and there's rioting or damage to campus buildings or that kind of thing, does it cross the line there, or is that what I mean? Like, who gets to sort of draw the line, if that makes sense?
Yeah, who gets to draw the line is the exact question. And so I think in the cases where you could legitimately argue that a behavior of a student, an international student, caused a destabilizing force at a university, then you could certainly put a pause on their visa or challenge their student status. But again, the protective measure here, because it's again something that we believe in as Americans, is you get to stay here and defend it, right? So even if they revoke your visa, but your student status still exists, which is like you're still enrolled in classes, you haven't violated any of the terms that the university's systems have set, you get to stay here and fight that. So it's not about the ultimate decision of whether or not you did something bad that's causing a destabilization or you committed a crime. It's right now what we're arguing about is whether or not you have a right to challenge it before they remove you. Yeah. And that's the distinction.
And that's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing that playing out here in the case that we've been talking about with this grad student who now, as we just reported right before you came on, had his day in court today. We'll have another day. It looks like due process is playing out the way in the right that he has for due process. So if that, assuming that happens across the board and there is due process in all of these cases, how far can they go, really? I mean, do you know what I mean? I feel like isn't it just going to kind of come back to, well, it doesn't meet this standard, so here's your visa back, or am I wrong?
Yeah. Can I ask, with this particular case, did they say the reason why his status is being challenged besides the DUI?
No. Right now, all we have is this prior DUI, and I think part of the argument. So part of the argument today, and I wasn't there, but just listening to our reporter who was there, is the attorney for this student said, look, he pled guilty to this in 2023. He hasn't owned a car since. He had no priors. He has not been in trouble since. He's had a full course load here in the U.S. and has not caused any issues. And then the government, the attorney for the government, is saying, this was sort of a really big deal because he blew more than twice the legal limit at the time. They're kind of really leaning into the dangerous situation that was. Nobody can deny that, right? So that's kind of the battle now. But yeah, I guess, again, it feels a little subjective maybe to people looking in from the outside to say, well, we're going for this, but then there's this degree of that, and So
that's the exact question.
Okay.
Yes, you nailed the exact issue, right? Because it feels like it's subjective. That's why you need your day in court, because if the question that you're asking is this person dangerous? Does this person's presence here in the United States pose a danger or a threat to Americans? Then it's not for the executive branch or the legislative branch to decide that. It's for the judicial branch to decide that. So the executive can start enforcing laws, like you said, where he can decide, okay, the Alien Enemies Act applies, or for reasons of national security, we need to start cracking down on immigration rules, right? But because it is subjective, which is exactly right. Because it is subjective, then you must have your day in court so that a judge can stand there and then both sides can make their argument, and you can hopefully end up with a fair result where somebody makes a judgment about whether or not this person actually poses a threat.
Okay. Last thing, I promised. You had some, when you talked to the immigration attorney earlier this week, they gave you some advice for students or families who have students to sort of check in on status. Could you let us know again what that was?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you are an international student and you are concerned about your position here, your visa, like your immigration status, is separate from your student status. And so attorneys are recommending that you contact your university and check on your student status once every 2 to 4 weeks to see whether or not your student status has been challenged. Because if it has, then you can start taking the steps that you need in order to make plans in case you would be detained or deported, especially if you have a family.
Okay. All right. So Madeline, thank you again for your time and insights into all this, helping us kind of pull it all apart and take a look at it, through trying to take some emotion out of it, because it's such an emotional issue too, and just really looking at kind of the law and how that plays into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And I think I'm so glad that you asked the questions that you did, because I think it really does get to narrow it down, because it seems like and it is, these are big deals, but it seems like it's this sort of amorphous issue that people just have big feelings about. But when you examine it carefully and you narrow it down, you realize, oh, okay, I know, because the Trump administration chose these statutes as the ones to defend what they're doing. I know what they're trying to do is bypass due process. That's what's going on here. And so when you narrow it down like that, if the issue becomes more digestible, and then people who are watching can use that to make draw their own conclusions and take their own next steps that they feel are appropriate.
All right. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.